The city of Yalara used to shine like a jewel among the stars. It had tall glass towers, peaceful parks, and bright skies filled with flying transports. Aliens of all kinds lived together in harmony, trading goods, sharing cultures, and dreaming about the future, but that future was destroyed the day the invaders came. It started with a shadow in the sky. Then the skies went dark, not because of clouds, but because of enemy ships. No warnings, no negotiations, just fire. Buildings collapsed. Screams filled the streets, and panic spread faster than the flames. The people of Yalara weren't soldiers. They were families, students, workers. They weren't ready for war. The alien invaders called themselves the Draxan Horde. They believed Yalara had no right to exist. They said this planet was strategic, and they wanted it for themselves. Within days, they shut down the power grid, jammed all communication, and blocked every ship from leaving. The cities became prisons, and slowly, the people lost hope. The Galactic Council didn't respond. Nearby planets refused to help. They all feared the Draxans. Yalara's leaders sent distress signals to every known system, but silence answered them. One by one, other cities fell, and soon, only the capital city remained broken, hungry, but still alive. This last city stood on a high mountain ridge, surrounded by canyons that made it harder to attack. That gave them a small advantage, but it wouldn't last. The defenders were running out of supplies, medicine, and energy. People boiled dirty water and ate whatever they could find. Old weapons were pulled out from museums and storage bunkers. Retired soldiers returned to duty. Teenagers trained with wooden sticks, and everyone prepared for the end. Inside, a ruined control center. Commander Arlen sat at a dusty console. His gray beard was messy, his uniform torn, but his eyes still held fire. He watched the last distress signal flicker on the screen. Its battery would die soon, and after that, there would be nothing left to call for help. Keep it going. He told the technician beside him, even if no one hears us. But sir, the young technician said, it's been months. No one's coming. Arlen looked at the cracked ceiling, listening to the distant sound of shell fire. Then let this be our last light, he said. Even if we fall, someone will know we tried. Elsewhere in the city, a mother named Kella sat in a basement with her 2 daughters. The walls were covered in soot, and the only light came from a broken lamp. Her youngest, barely 5, was coughing from the smoke. Kella held her close, humming a lullaby she could barely remember. She didn't know if they would live through the night. Above them, patrol units kept watch, even though most of their drones were destroyed. Every hour, someone spotted the Draxans gathering outside the city, preparing their final assault. No more time, no more delays. This would be the last stand. Still, inside every heart burned something small but powerful, a flicker of hope. Even when logic said hope was foolish, people held on to it. They whispered stories about the past, about how Earth once protected the weak, how humans used to arrive when all others turned away. But Earth had been silent for over a century. Some believed they were gone. Others believed they were just hiding, preparing, waiting. Old stories said humans fought like demons when their allies were attacked. They said Terran dreadnoughts once blocked out stars and brought fire to tyrants. But those were just legends, now stories to make children sleep. Yet on this night, as the final beacon blinked in the sky, something strange happened. On a long-forgotten satellite orbiting the edge of the system, a red light flashed. A deep signal was picked up by a listening device buried under layers of ice. One built centuries ago by Earth inside that cold machine. Ancient systems hummed to life. Rusted gears moved, and a single word was sent across a hidden channel. Alert! Back in Yalara, Commander Arlen closed his eyes as the beacon's final pulse flickered. He placed his hand on the console, whispering, "Forgive us," but far above, something else was stirring. In deep space, far beyond the edge of known charts. A dormant AI awakened. Old Earth codes were decrypted. Encrypted channels opened. And someone somewhere was listening. They didn't know it yet, but Yalara was no longer alone. The defenders sharpened their knives and tightened their belts, expecting death. Mothers kissed their children for what they thought was the last time, and the night grew colder than ever before, but just before dawn. Something flickered in the eastern sky, too high, too fast, too big to be anything local, and somewhere deep. Under Mars, in a bunker no one remembered, a voice calmly spoke, command acknowledged. Mobilizing fleet, Yalara had sent its last signal, but that signal had reached Earth, and Earth was waking up. Long ago, Earth had made promises to its allies. They had formed pacts, signed treaties, and defended the weak, but after centuries of war, betrayal, and loss, humanity stepped away from the galactic stage. Earth became quiet, its fleets vanished, and its people stopped answering calls for help. Many believed Earth had grown tired, some believed they had fallen. Others said humans were hiding behind their walls, watching and waiting, but no one knew for sure. The galaxy had changed since then. New empires rose, old ones fell. And the Draxans grew powerful and cruel. They filled the empty space Earth had left behind. Crushing small worlds and enslaving colonies, no one stood against them, not anymore. The memory of Earth's strength became a bedtime story. Something leaders laughed about in secret meetings. They thought Earth was gone for good. But Earth wasn't gone. They were just quiet, watching from the shadows, listening, learning, and waiting for the moment they would be needed again. And now that moment had arrived, deep beneath the surface of Mars. There was a hidden command center. It had no windows. No decorations, just cold metal and machines that never slept. One of those machines, silent for more than 100 years, suddenly blinked to life. A signal had reached it, the same signal, sent from Yalara's last city. The distress code was old, buried under dust, but still recognized by Earth's ancient systems. Within seconds, alarms echoed through the underground halls. Old screens turned on, glowing with red warnings. Lights blinked, air pressure shifted, and deep inside the bunker, a large sealed door opened with a loud hiss. Behind it sat a man, Admiral Reza. Once commander of Earth's greatest fleet, he had stayed in this bunker alone for 30 years, watching the stars, maintaining silence. He was old now, with gray hair and tired eyes, but he was still sharp. When the alarm sounded, he stood slowly, walked to the command terminal, and stared at the message blinking in red. Alliance signal detected, Priority 1, Yalara. His hands trembled slightly as he entered his code. The machine asked, Activate emergency protocol, Earthfire. He paused, thinking of all the years Earth had waited, all the lives that had been lost while they stayed silent. Then he pressed the key and whispered, Yes. The entire bunker roared to life. Deep under Earth's crust, old warships began to awaken. Sleeping giants that hadn't moved in 100 years were powered up again. Engineers rushed from hidden cities preparing fuel, weapons, and systems that most of the galaxy had forgotten even existed. On Earth's surface, no news. Channels reported the activation. No government spoke of war. Everything moved in silence because this mission was not about power or politics. It was about a promise Earth had once made to Yalara, that if they were ever in danger, help would come, no matter how long it took. The fleet was known as the Silent Guard, and the world had not seen them in centuries, in space docks. Hidden behind moons, dreadnoughts began to rise. Their hulls were black as the void, massive enough to cast shadows on planets. The ships didn't need large crews anymore. They were guided by AI and controlled remotely from deep Earth command. But even so, many humans volunteered to serve again. Old soldiers came out of retirement, putting on uniforms that still smelled. Of dust and war, young pilots begged for a place ready to fight for people they had never met. Reza stood at the central command station, watching the map of the galaxy shift. Yalara's position glowed red, surrounded, weakened, almost gone. But Earth's fleet would not arrive too late. "Not this time. Begin launch," he ordered. And the voice of Earth whispered across every silent system. "Operation Earthfire is live far across the stars." The Draxans continued their siege. They laughed as the city's beacon died out. They thought the final hope of Yalara had faded. They were wrong, because light was now coming from another direction. And this light was not a beacon, it was fire. As Earth's dreadnoughts jumped through space, they moved in perfect silence. No transmissions, no warnings. Their engines were powered by ancient technology, faster and stronger than anything the current galaxy used. They would arrive in less than a day, but before the ships even reached Yalara. Their signal had been noticed. Across the galaxy, listening stations picked up energy spikes. The Galactic Council went into emergency session. Old empires panicked. Pirates shut down their ships, and smugglers turned off their engines. Everyone recognized the signal signature. It was Earth. Earth was moving again, and the galaxy was not ready for what came next. In the cold emptiness of space, something was changing. Stars still burned. Planets still turned. But now, new shadows moved among them. Giant ships, old and powerful, had begun to wake up. Ships that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for over a century. These weren't normal warships. They were Earth's dreadnoughts. Machines of war so large and dangerous that entire fleets once turned and ran when they arrived. These dreadnoughts were quiet, silent as they drifted out of the deep space docks hidden behind asteroids. Their engines pulsed with energy. Ancient cores that still burned strong after so many years of sleep. Every system was checked, every weapon reloaded, and every shield restored. Earth had not forgotten how to prepare for war. The flagship, named Valkyrie, led the way. She was a monster of steel and black armor, her body longer than 5 city blocks. Her cannons could melt moons. Her shields could block solar storms, and her AI named Aura was smarter than most. Living beings, Aura had been silent for years, but now she spoke again, her voice calm and cold. All systems online, destination locked. Yalara, one by one. Other ships followed, smaller than Valkyrie, but still deadly. These ships were crewed by both AI and humans, old veterans who had served during the last wars, and young men and women who had grown up listening to stories about Earth's golden age. They all gathered. Now not for glory, not for conquest, but for something older, something purer, to keep a promise. The fleet was known as the Silent Guard. They never responded to politics. They never took sides in trade disputes. They only moved when a true distress signal reached them. That signal had come from Yalara. On the outer edge of Yalara's system, pirate ships picked up strange readings. At first, they thought it was just another solar flare. Then they saw the ripple in space, a shift in gravity, and heat blooming from nothing. Their scanners glitched, systems crashed, and one captain screamed as a shadow passed above his ship. "It's them," he whispered, shaking. "It's Earth." He wasn't wrong. Back on Yalara. The people in the last city didn't know any of this. They were too busy trying to survive. Their walls were cracked, food was low, and everyone believed it was their final day. Commander Arlen stood on the city wall, holding binoculars, watching. The Draxan forces gathered below. There were thousands of them, tanks, ships, and walking machines taller than buildings. The final attack would come at sunrise, beside Arlen. A teenage scout named Lyra looked up at the sky. If help was coming, it would be here by now, she said quietly. Wouldn't it? Arlen didn't answer. He couldn't lie to her, but he also couldn't give up. So he kept looking through the binoculars, waiting, praying, and then it happened. A light appeared in the sky, not like the beacon they had used before. This light was sharp, fast, and growing larger by the second. Then another light followed it, then 5 more, until the whole eastern sky looked like it was cracking open. The ground shook, air roared, and clouds spun into circles as the first dreadnought broke through the atmosphere. It was Valkyrie, and she didn't come quietly. She came like a god. Falling from heaven, people ran out of shelters, looked up, and stopped breathing. Children pointed, mothers wept, and even the soldiers dropped their weapons in shock. Above them floated the largest warship they had ever seen. Its armor was scarred from old battles, but its guns glowed bright, ready to fire. More ships followed. Smaller, faster fighters and bombers moving in tight formations. They flew over the city in silence, then turned and faced the Draxan army waiting outside the canyon. Commander Arlen stared up, unable to speak. Then a voice came from the sky, broadcast across every speaker in the city. "This is Admiral Reza of the Earth's Silent Guard. Yalara, you are not alone." The people erupted in cheers, screams, and tears. It was real. Earth had come, but the Draxans didn't cheer. They panicked. Their ships scrambled, soldiers ran to defensive positions, and officers screamed into radios. They had planned to destroy a dying city, not fight. Earth's most feared fleet, the first warning shot came from Valkyrie's main cannon. It didn't hit anything yet, but the explosion cracked the mountain edge and sent a fireball into the clouds. It was a message, clear and deadly. Leave now or be erased. But the Draxans, proud and arrogant, didn't leave. They believed they still had the numbers, that Earth was just bluffing. They were wrong. Inside Valkyrie, Admiral Reza stood. On the bridge, his eyes locked on the battlefield below. He raised one hand and gave the order. Begin bombardment. The sky turned gold. The mountains shook, and the war truly began. And for the first time in decades, the galaxy remembered. Why Earth was feared? Because when humans came, they came to finish it. The moment Earth's first dreadnought broke through the clouds, everything changed. The sky over Laylara, once full of smoke and fear, now burned with bright light. The huge black ship hovered above the city like a mountain in the air. Her engines hummed with deep power, her armored surface shining with fire and scars of old battles. This was the Valkyrie, the oldest and most powerful dreadnought Earth had ever built. Children pointed up in awe. Old people dropped to their knees in shock. And the broken defenders of Yalara finally breathed again. For so long they had been waiting to die. But now a miracle had come from the stars. Admiral Reza stood on the Valkyrie's command bridge. He stared at the battlefield below through a large holoscreen. His hands were behind his back, his face calm, but deep inside. His heart was burning with anger. He saw the broken buildings, the starving people, the weak defenders still standing despite all the pain, and most of all, he saw the enemy, Draxan spreading like a dark flood outside the canyon walls. He tapped a small button on his control panel, and his voice echoed across the city and battlefield. "This is Admiral Reza of Earth's Silent Guard," he said, slowly and clearly. "Yalara stands under Earth's protection. You will not harm these people any longer." The voice was heard everywhere through broken radios, loudspeakers, and even on the enemy's frequencies. It was like a ghost from the past had returned. The Draxans looked up in fear, some of them stepping back. They had heard stories of the Terran dreadnoughts. They thought it was all legend. But now they saw the truth with their own eyes. Inside the Draxan command ship, General Veer's face was pale. He slammed his fist on the console. "It's just one ship," he shouted. "They think we'll be scared by old machines." But even as he spoke, more shadows appeared in the sky. 1, 2, 5. 10 more dreadnoughts descended from orbit, like giants walking through clouds. Then came the carriers launching hundreds of fighter jets that swirled in perfect formation. Below them, troop ships dropped from the sky like steel comets. Ready to land with ground forces, Yalara's people watched all this with wide eyes. Many cried, not from fear, but from hope. Some held their children and whispered, "We are saved." Commander Arlen stood at the edge of the city wall, his binoculars shaking in his hands. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The promise had been kept. Earth hadn't forgotten them. His voice cracked as he turned to his officers and said, "We hold the line. The sky belongs to us now." The Draxans didn't wait any longer. Their ships fired first, bright red beams lighting the sky. Cannons roared, missiles launched, and the ground shook from the first blasts. But none of their attacks touched the Terran ships. The Valkyries' shields flared bright blue, absorbing everything like dust against stone. Then Earth answered with a single command from Admiral Reza. The Valkyries' main cannon charged up. A deep humming filled the air, louder than thunder. The cannon fired once, then the blast cut through the sky like a blade of light. A Draxan warship was hit directly. It didn't explode, simply vanished. Vaporized in an instant, the battlefield went silent for 2 long seconds. Then Earth's fleet opened fire. Dozens of dreadnoughts rained destruction on the enemy lines. Bombers swooped down with deadly precision, blowing up tanks and artillery positions. Mechs landed from orbit, their feet smashing into the ground like falling meteors, and within minutes, Earth's forces had turned the battlefield into a storm of fire and steel. The Draxans were not ready for this. Their plans had been based on fear and silence. They thought Yalara would die alone. They never believed Earth would come. And they never imagined this kind of power still existed. Admiral Reza's face didn't change as he watched the enemy lines collapse. "No mercy for those who target the innocent," he said quietly. "End them on the ground." Human soldiers landed near the city gates, wearing black armor and carrying rifles that glowed with blue energy. One of them, Captain Erin Cole, was the first to step onto the battlefield. She raised her weapon and signaled to the remaining defenders of Shalara. "We're here to fight with you," she shouted. "Let's take back your home." The defenders, weak and tired, stood up with new strength. They followed the human soldiers into the chaos, striking back at the Draxans who once ruled over them. The sky above burned with explosions, but the city below roared with life. In the Draxan command ship, General Vor ordered a retreat, but it was too late. Earth's fleet had already surrounded them. The Draxan ships that tried to run were picked off one by one. Those that stayed behind were destroyed in massive fireballs. After just 30 minutes, the battle was over. The Draxan army had been crushed. Their leaders were captured or dead, and their ships were falling from the sky like broken stars. Hulara stood in silence, then cheers erupted from every corner of the city. People ran into the streets, holding each other, laughing, crying. They looked to the sky, not with fear, but with pride. Earth had returned. And they had come not as conquerors, but as guardians. The city of Yalara was still standing, but the ground around it was black and burning. Thick smoke covered the valley where the Draxan army had once waited with pride and power. Now all that remained were wrecked machines, broken weapons, and the silence of defeat. The sky was still glowing from the final strikes of Earth's dreadnoughts, and the air smelled of metal, fire, and victory. The people of Yalara stood outside their shelters, looking up at the warships above them. Some were still afraid, some still confused, but most were crying not because of sadness, but because they had survived for the first time in many months. They were not alone. Admiral Reza stood on the bridge of Valkyrie, his arms folded, eyes focused on the battlefield below. His face was calm, but his heart was heavy. He had seen this scene too many times. Another city burned, another people nearly destroyed, and always it came too late. But this time, at least, they had arrived in time to stop the final blow. All Draxan forces eliminated or captured. Reported one of his officers. No remaining threats detected. Reza nodded slowly. Begin recovery phase. Land the aid teams. On the surface, dropships descended like soft rain. But instead of soldiers, they carried doctors, engineers, builders, and food. Medical teams rushed to the injured, giving water, wrapping wounds, and calming terrified children. Engineers set up clean water machines and power sources. Whole sections of the broken city came back to life, and hours lights flickered on. Heaters warmed cold basements. And kitchens boiled food for the first time in weeks, in the streets. Captain Aaron Cole led a group of human soldiers through the wreckage. They weren't there to fight anymore. They were there to help. She stopped beside a collapsed building where a young boy sat alone in the dirt. He looked up at her with wide, empty eyes. She knelt down and gently handed him a protein bar. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now, nearby." Commander Arlen stood beside a broken fountain, watching everything. His tired eyes followed the Terran soldiers. As they worked side by side with his people, they didn't act like heroes or conquerors. They moved with purpose, with silence, with respect. He had lived through too many battles to believe in miracles, but this felt close. One of the human officers approached him, offering a bottle of clean water. "Commander," he said, "Admiral Reza invites you aboard the Valkyrie. He would like to speak with you personally." Arlen looked up at the massive ship in the sky. He nodded slowly. "Tell him." "It would be my honor." A short while later, Arlen stood inside the Valkyrie's command deck, his boots echoing on the steel floor. The room was large but quiet, filled with softly humming machines and glowing lights. In the center stood Admiral Reza, hands behind his back, staring at a floating image of the city. "You've held the line well, Commander," Reza said without turning. "Your people fought bravely, and they didn't break." Arlen stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. "We held on because we had no choice but you. You came when no one else did." Reza finally turned to face him, his eyes sharp but kind. "We were late," he said, "but not silent. Earth has not forgotten its old promises. We may have stayed hidden, but we still watch." And when the call came, we answered. The two men shook hands, not as strangers, but as brothers in war. Reza then gestured to a map showing nearby systems. "The Draxans won't stop with Yalara. They've taken other colonies too, small places without strong defense. We plan to liberate them, but we need your help." Arlen nodded without hesitation. "You have it. We owe you everything." Back on the ground, the people of Yalara gathered in the central plaza. It had been empty for months. But now music played from old speakers and tables were set up with food and supplies. Children laughed. Mothers smiled, and people danced for the first time since the invasion began. Terran soldiers watched from the edges, some smiling, some joining in. For this moment, there was peace. Near the plaza, a Draxan prisoner sat quietly under guard. He looked around, confused by the human's kindness. He had been told that Earthlings were monsters, savage beings who destroyed without mercy. But these humans were healing, feeding, protecting, treating even their enemies with basic care. He lowered his head in shame, not understanding how the stories had been so wrong. From orbit, the Terran fleet spread out, scanning the galaxy, preparing for the next mission. Admiral Reza knew this was just the beginning. Earth had returned and the galaxy would feel their presence again, not as rulers, but as guardians, protectors of peace. Defenders of the broken for too long. The stars had been quiet. Evil had grown in that silence. But now, the silence was broken, and a voice had returned. The voice of Earth. It spoke not in words, but in action, not in threats, but in truth, and its message was clear. We protect our own, and we never forget. The battle was over, but the air still smelled of smoke and burned metal. The land around Yalara was scarred, blackened by explosions and broken machines, but for the first time in months, there was no gunfire. No screams, only the quiet sound of rebuilding Earth's ships stayed in orbit above the planet, their shadows stretching across the sky like silent guardians on the ground. Human and Yalaran workers cleared rubble together. They moved bricks, lifted broken steel, and carried survivors to the healing tents. Earth's medics worked non-stop, using advanced tech to treat injuries that local doctors thought were hopeless. The Draxans who survived the battle had been taken as prisoners. They were being kept in a secure zone just outside the city, guarded carefully but treated with respect. The humans didn't torture them or leave them to starve. They gave food, clean water, and even medical care. Some Draxan prisoners stared in confusion. This was not the cruelty they expected. This was not what they were told about humans. One prisoner, a young Draxan officer named Tarek, sat quietly. Inside a force field cage, his arm was bandaged by a human medic. His commander had abandoned him during the retreat, and now his enemies were treating his wounds. A human soldier stood nearby, watching him but not speaking. After a long pause, Tarek finally asked, "Why are you helping me?" The human looked at him and replied calmly, "Because we're not like you." Those words stayed in Tarek's mind for a long time, back in the city. Commander Arlen and Admiral Reza walked together through the ruined streets. People stopped to greet them. Children waved, and old survivors cried tears of thanks. Arlen couldn't believe how quickly the humans had changed everything. Streets that were once dead now had light, laughter, and music. Even the broken fountains flowed with clean water again. "You didn't just save us," Arlen said. "You gave us a second life." Reza gave a small nod, but his eyes were serious. "We came because of a promise, Commander. But now that we've seen what the Draxans did here, we won't stop. This is bigger than Yalara." Arlen looked at him, confused. "You mean there are more worlds like us?" Reza pulled up a holomap on his wrist device. It showed dozens of red dots across the sector. "All of these planets have fallen under Draxan control," he said. "Some were allies, some were neutral. Most of them are suffering in silence. Just like you were." Arlen stared at the map in shock. "Why didn't the Galactic Council do anything?" Reza's voice grew colder. "Because they're afraid. Afraid of war, afraid of the Draxans, and maybe afraid of us." At that moment, a message came through Reza's communicator. His officer said, "Sir, long-range scans have picked up movement near the Myrix belt. It's a Draxan fleet, and they're heading toward another colony, Celiar Prime." Reza's expression turned hard, and no one else is responding. "None, sir. The Council hasn't even acknowledged the distress call." Reza turned to Arlen. "You said your people wanted to fight. Here's your chance to prove it." Without hesitation, Arlen replied, "Give us a ship, and we'll stand beside you." Reza smiled. "You'll have more than a ship, Commander. You'll have a place in Earth's new strike force." The next day, Earth's fleet began preparing for their next mission. The Terran dreadnoughts refueled, restocked, and loaded their drop pods with fresh supplies and weapons. Yalaran volunteers joined the crews, eager to repay the help they had received. For many of them, this would be the first time leaving their home planet, but they were ready. A young Yalaran mechanic named Tevi was among the volunteers. He had lost his entire family during the siege. His heart was heavy with grief, but full of purpose. "I won't let what happened to us happen to anyone else," he told the Earth recruiter, who nodded and welcomed him aboard. In orbit, the Valkyrie waited like a silent mountain, ready to move again. Admiral Reza stood at the command bridge, watching the stars. His fleet was no longer just a defense force. It was now a symbol, a reminder to the galaxy that Earth had returned not to conquer, but to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Before departure, Reza sent a message across all known systems. "This is Admiral Reza of Earth. To the oppressed, we are coming. To the cowards, stay out of our way, and to the Draxan Empire, we are not afraid of you." The message was short, but it traveled far, across planets, stations, and ships on some worlds. People cried when they heard it. On others, angry rulers cursed and demanded Earth stay out of their space. But the people, especially those suffering in silence, began to whisper a new word with hope in their voices. Earth, back on Yallara. The people gathered once more in the central plaza. This time, not to cry or beg but to say goodbye to the human fleet. Families held up signs of thanks. Children waved small Terran flags. And music played as the dreadnoughts slowly rose into the sky. Tevi looked out the window of his new ship, watching his home disappear below the clouds. He was scared, but proud. He was no longer a victim. He was now part of something greater. And as the Earth fleet disappeared into the stars once more, one truth burned in every heart across Yallara and beyond. Earth was no longer silent. They had returned to the galaxy, and this time they were not leaving anyone behind. Far beyond Yallara, across space filled with stars and silence, Earth's voice had begun to spread, not through words alone, but through action. The battle at Yallara had changed everything. It had awakened a fear in the hearts of tyrants and hope in those who had been forgotten. Earth had been silent for 100 years, but now the galaxy was listening again in the Galactic Council chamber. High above the core world of Valorous, panic was rising. Alien leaders sat around a great circular table, each one watching the same thing. A giant screen showing Earth's dreadnoughts leaving Yallara and moving towards Celier Prime. A colony now under Draxan attack. They came out of nowhere. Shouted one counselor, his long arms shaking. How can they still have ships that powerful? Another counselor, older and wiser, leaned forward. We made a mistake. We assumed Earth had grown soft, lazy, tired of war. A third counselor, from a neutral world, whispered quietly, I think they were just waiting, watching, and choosing their moment. The council had no answers. All they knew was that Earth had returned and they were not asking for permission. On the outer rim, where Celier Prime sat surrounded by red sand and glass-like mountains, the Draxans were preparing to crush another colony. Their fleet surrounded the small planet, cutting off communications and blocking all escape routes. They believed no one would stop them. They believed Earth's return was just a story from scared survivors. But as their fleet commander stood on the bridge, giving orders to prepare for the final strike, one of his officers shouted, Something's coming through the storm field. Before he could answer, space itself bent and twisted, and out of it came Earth's fleet, black and massive, engines glowing like suns. The Valkyrie led the way, her cannons already locked on targets. Behind her came dozens of Terran warships, each moving with calm power and deadly silence. The Draxan commander screamed, Defensive formation. Fire all weapons. But it was already too late. Earth's fighters swarmed like angry wasps, cutting through enemy lines. Their AI systems dodged fire with perfect timing, striking the weakest points with deadly precision. Ground forces began to land on the planet. Soldiers in black armor carrying energy shields and pulse rifles. The people of Celier Prime looked up from their bunkers and shelters and saw the sky change from darkness to hope. The battle didn't last long. The Draxans were strong, but they were not prepared for Earth's fury. In less than an hour, their fleet was broken, and those who survived begged for mercy. Some tried to run, but Earth's blockade ships shut down every exit. Admiral Reza stood once more at the command of the Valkyrie, watching as the final Draxan ship exploded in a flash of light. Send the message, he said. His officer nodded and opened a wide transmission. This time, the message was not just to the Council, not just to Celiar Primate, was to the entire galaxy. The screen lit up across thousands of planets, ships, and stations. People in cafes, on farms, in bunkers, and even in prisons watched as Admiral Reza's face appeared. His voice was calm, but strong. "This is Admiral Reza of Earth's Silent Guard." He said, "To all free worlds we have returned. We have not come to rule. We have come to protect. If you are in danger, if your people are suffering, we will come. If you have lost hope, we will bring it back." He paused for a moment before continuing, "But to those who bring terror and pain, to those who burn cities and silence the weak, your time is over. We do not forget and we do not forgive." Across the galaxy, cheers rose in refugee camps and poor colonies. People who had once felt forgotten now stood tall. Whispers of Earth's return turned into songs. Children painted human ships on walls, and old stories were told again with new endings. But not everyone was happy. In secret chambers, the leaders of the Draxan Empire met in fear. "This changes everything." One hissed, "Earth will destroy all we've built." Another growled, "We must act first, strike before they grow stronger." But deep down, even they knew they had awakened something far more dangerous than they expected. Earth was not just strong. They were united, quiet, and full of fire. The kind of fire that only burns after years of silence. Back on Yalara, the people listened to the broadcast and cried again. This time not from fear, but from pride. They were the first to be saved. The first to see the return of Earth's flame. Their children wore Terran colors. Their schools began teaching Earth's history, and every home flew a flag with 2 stars, one for Yalara and one for Earth. In the main plaza, Tevi the young Yalaran mechanic who had joined Earth's strike force sent a message to his friends. "We took Celiar Prime," he said, smiling into the camera. "It was fast. We saved thousands. I saw their faces. They looked like we did before Earth came. Now they believe too." Commander Arlen stood beside the new memorial built in Yalara's center. It was a statue of a human and a Yalaran standing together, shields raised. Beneath it were words carved in 3 languages. We were not alone. And now, across the stars, no one felt alone again, because Earth was moving. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as a promise. And that promise was loud and clear. If you call, they will come. Sparks flew from the hull of the final Draxan cruiser as it was dragged into orbit above Celiar Prime. The battle was over. Earth had won again across the stars. News traveled faster than fire through dry grass. Earth's dreadnoughts were no longer myths. They were real, and they were moving. The galaxy was not ready for what came next. On planet after planet, people gathered in town halls, in secret caves, and inside broken buildings to listen, to watch, and to hope. They had seen the message Admiral Reza sent. They heard his promise. We will come, and for many. It was the first time in years they believed those words could be true. On Yalara, where everything had started, life was slowly returning. The streets were clean again. The lights stayed on. Children played in parks that had once been bombed out. Ruins human engineers stayed behind to help rebuild power plants and schools. Yalaran doctors worked beside Terran medics to run free clinics. The city, once nearly dead, now glowed with life again. Commander Arlen stood in front of a new academy, one built with Earth's help. It was a place to train defenders, diplomats, and engineers from many different worlds. If we want to stop the Draxans for good, Arlen said to a group of students, we must learn to protect not just ourselves, but each other. And they listened, because he was no longer just a war hero. He was a symbol of what happens when the forgotten stand up and find hope again. Far above, the Valkyrie floated in low orbit, her shadow passing slowly over Yalara's mountains. Admiral Reza stood in his command room, eyes on a large map of the galaxy. Each day, more distress calls came in, more red lights blinking across the stars. Some were from old allies, others from strangers, but all of them were desperate. Another world. Asked one of Reza's officers. Reza nodded slowly. Yes, and not the last, Tevi. The young Yalran who had joined the Earth Strike Force stood beside Reza now. No longer just a volunteer, but an official communications officer. Sir, he said, looking up at the Admiral. My people. We want to help, not just fight, but heal. Rebuild. Can we do that too? Reza looked at him and smiled. That's exactly why we're here. The new plan wasn't just about war. It was about rebuilding the galaxy, one world at a time. Earth's fleet was growing again. New recruits from dozens of planets were signing up, Yalarans, Celians, and even defectors from old enemy forces. They had all seen what Earth could do, and they wanted to be part of something greater. Ships were renamed with new banners. Not just Terran flags, but shared symbols of peace and unity. A hammer and a shield crossed over a burning star. It became the mark of Earth's new movement, one that wasn't built on fear, but on hope. And defense, in the Galactic Council, silence had turned to nervous whispers. Some demanded Earth be stopped. They're moving without permission. They shouted. They didn't wait for council votes. Others stood up and said, maybe we were the ones who waited too long. Maybe Earth is doing what we should have done. One counselor from a small, forgotten moon simply stood and said, they saved my people when none of you would. That is all I need to know. The council could no longer pretend Earth was quiet. Earth's name was once again being spoken with both respect and fear. But no one could deny one thing: where Earth arrived. The killing stopped, and the rebuilding began across the stars. Humans were no longer just a rumor. They were real, and they were rising. Back on Yalara, a ceremony was held under the open sky. The city's people had gathered to honor those who had fallen, and to thank those who had saved them. A large stone memorial had been built, carved with the names of Yalaran defenders and Terran soldiers. Alike on top stood a sculpture, a Terran dreadnought with wings of light. Floating above a handraise toward the sky, Commander Arlen gave a speech to the crowd, his voice full of emotion, when we had no more strength. They gave us theirs, he said. When we were forgotten, they remembered. Earth kept their promise. And now it's our turn. We will never let the darkness rise again. Not while we still stand. People wept, hugged, and stood together, different species, different worlds, but now bound by the same history. As the crowd looked up, they saw dozens of Earth ships rising again from orbit. One by one, they turned toward the stars, engines flaring with light. Each ship heading toward a new world, a new cry for help, and behind them came ships with fresh colors, Yalaran ships, Celiar ships. All joining Earth's new fleet. Tevi sat at his station aboard the Valkyrie, his eyes scanning incoming messages. One pinged through. Colony Gara 4. Under attack. He turned to Reza and said, "Another one, sir." Reza didn't even blink. "Set course," he said. "Let them know we're coming." As the stars stretched in front of them, and the ships vanished into light, one truth rang louder than any weapon. Earth was no longer a forgotten name in history. They had returned not as rulers, not as saviors, but as a promise, kept, and wherever hope was dying. That promise now lived, because Earth would come, and when they came, they brought the light.